Namaste. Our topic for discussion today is controlling the uncontrollable. In the light of Bhagavad Gita, we'll be focusing on the shlokas from chapter 2, talking about the senses 58 to 61. Now, when you hear the topic controlling the uncontrollable, naturally the question comes in, what is controlling what? What is the uncontrollable? And the first thing that comes to us in our own experience is our thoughts. That I can't control my thoughts. My mind is continuously going on. There's so much of chatter, it cannot stop even for a second. So usually the common answer that comes to us is, my thoughts are uncontrollable, my mind can't stop. But if we take just one moment and see, what are these thoughts about? What is my mind thinking? What is happening? And then you will come to realize that it is my thoughts about my desires. That, oh, I want this. Oh, I wanted to go there. Oh, this statement I wanted to make. Or this is the place I wanted to visit. So once we bring our attention to those thoughts, we realize that it is not the thoughts which are not uncontrollable. It is the desire which we have, which we keep thinking about, which needs our own attention. And that is where the role of our mind comes in. That because man is a mental being, we have that ability to pause, to reflect, and see, what am I desiring? Why am I desiring? Can I give that little pause to myself and ask those questions? We, as human beings, have the gift of self-awareness. Can we use it? Can we pause and observe that what is happening? And the mind, which is really in a service to our desires, can we bring it to the service of the higher? How it is inward and outward in this world? We take our mind and turn it towards the inward and upward, to the higher divine consciousness. That is the process which one takes. The uncontrollable begins to be controlled. So that is the process which one needs to embark on. And as it is said in the Gita, like how the tortoise withdraws the limbs in the shell, that is how we have to withdraw our senses inside. So that is the first understanding which we have. Now one can ask that question, that what is that inside where which we have to withdraw? So then again, we have to bring our awareness to our inner landscape. What is my inner being looks like? Am I aware of my inner being? When I'm withdrawing my senses, where am I withdrawing them to? So slowly we become aware of my own inner process, my own psychological landscape, and see that the senses which are turned outwards, how can I bring them inward? That is the process which one undertakes. In our general understanding, we see that we are always focused on the outside. Our consciousness is usually rooted in our physical. The combination which we often experience on our everyday basis is the physical vital consciousness. That how my physical is in service to the vital, and also the vital has that power to bring our mind together. We use our reason, we use our power of justification to make ourselves believe that no, this is what I want, this is really important. I really have to have it. If I don't have it, things won't work out. So the vital, the desire has that power to hijack our reason, to give into the sensory enjoyment. So again, the process which we talk about, the mind comes into the picture again. That how the vital needs to be under the guidance of the mind first, and then offer it to the higher. Like how even in integral education, we talk about the near to the far approach. So we start from where we are. We are outward, we have to move inward. So how the turning outward to inward becomes our journey. Even this is like how the process of yoga works. That our egoistic state of consciousness, that is rooted, that is turned in the outward appearance, how that turns into the higher state. Now, this is very important for us to understand that when Sri Aurobindo talks about the process of yoga, even in the synthesis of yoga, he speaks about outward appearances and higher state. The word itself which comes with outward is appearance. It's an appearance. It is not somewhere we have to be. Where we have to be is the higher state of consciousness that lies within. So even with the mere understanding of the words used, we understand that where our real purpose lies. That how turning inwards is where the idea, where we belong. That is where the home is. So how the tortoise brings the limbs in the shell, that is where the withdrawal of senses in our own shell. And what lies in our shell? Our higher state of consciousness, the divinity within, the divine spark within. That is where we need to root ourselves. So whenever our sense of identity we talk about, we experience it within ourselves and not in the outside objects, not in the outside world. We engage with the outside world, but we do not get entangled in the outside world. And that is where, again, it is important for us to understand that when we speak about withdrawal, withdrawal is a word which can often be misunderstood. That withdrawal can also mean that, oh, I'm controlling myself, which doesn't mean that, oh, I have to reject the object, which means that I have to reject the desire of the object, which means we are talking about not the outer renunciation, but the inner renunciation. That it is not the object, but my thought about the object. The real renunciation happens when I don't even think about the object. So if we see the object-subject relationship, the thought about the object only doesn't occur to me. That is what is the actual renunciation. That the desire for the object is translated or is transported to the idea of the divine within me. So even then if I engage with the world outside, I engage without attachment. I understand that the senses given to me are my tools to operate in the world, to experience the world, but not to experience the desire in the world, but to experience the delight in the world. When I see divine in the world, so that delight in existence comes in a natural understanding and is automatically as a replacement of the desire I see in the world. So we have to make that shift from desire to the delight in the divine. So from desire to divine is what our aspiration is. The more the intensity of our aspiration, the more that transformation happens, more the purification of our senses happens. And then how we are engaged automatically turns in the inward and we start living more and more inwards. So when we talk about the cessation of desire, we are talking about the cessation of the cause of that desire. That when I come out in the world, engage with the world, I am engaging from a state of equanimity. I am not getting entangled. I understand, like very often we all experience like the basic needs of life, food for example. I know that I have a physical presence. I live in this physical body. It is important for me to take care of my physical. I know that food is required for my body. But do I desire food? Do I really keep thinking about food all the time? Oh, this is what I want to eat. Oh, this is my favorite. If I don't get this, then that is not something which I want. Or I really take food as an offering from the divine for the well-being of my physical, and I take it as an offering to the divine and keep my body healthy by giving it the required food. So what is my attitude? Am I completely rejecting the food? No, food, thinking about food is not good. But what is the time frame it is occupying? That is what one needs to understand. That in what intention am I doing the action? It's the intention which is very important for us, which helps us in purifying our senses, which helps us to use the senses as a tool to operate in the world and not get attached to the world. So once we become more and more aware of our entanglements, more and more about our intentions, we slowly get into the process of purification. And process of purification is very important for our transformation of our nature, which is our true purpose of yoga. So this is one thing which one needs to understand, that the inner renunciation happens through a systematic process of when we slowly turn ourselves inwards. And a state comes that even when we have to engage in our senses, there is no sense of attachment. It's like you come out of the house, you visit the world, and you go back to the house. And that house is your own shell. It is your own inner being, the divine den inside you. So that is where you live. And once we start living there more and more, inner renunciation happens as a natural process, and we live in the delight of the divine. Then we no more desire, we no more keep our mind occupied in the outward world. Our mind is automatically turned inwards and lives in the delight of existence, lives in the delight of divine. So that is when we talk about how the natural replacement of the rasa, the joy in the world, comes in when we rejoice in the delight of the divine. So the natural desire towards the world drops. So it becomes a process in itself, and we do not have to force ourselves that no, I don't want to think. It's like saying that, okay, don't think about the elephant, which means that automatically all you will do is think about the elephant. So mind is a very good instrument. It helps us control the vital. But then at one point of time, we surrender the mind to the higher reality. And that is what the actual process begins. And once we also understand that intensity of aspiration in this process of desire the divine is very important. So we see that how slowly we shift. First, we are dealing with desire here, which is very common, which even Sri Krishna says that though we talk about it so much that desire is bad, we should not give in to our senses, but is it not easy? It's easier said than done. So that is why what is important for us is to use our gift of self-awareness, to understand what are my indicators, what are my entanglements. Is food my entanglement? Is, say, some kind of good music is my entanglement? Or going out is my entanglement? What are my entanglements? So I recognize through the gift of self-awareness my entanglements, I observe them, and then I step back. I remember and offer those to the divine, that this is what my entanglements are, and I'm looking for the process of purification. And I intend to be rooted in the divinity within. So that remember and offer becomes a constant process. And I realize that my mind, my will, is an important instrument. But beyond that, I go and surrender to the divine. I be seated in the desire for the divine. It starts from the desire, but slowly as we progress on the path, the desire turns into the experience of the divine, and then the oneness with the divine. And this is the process which one goes through. And in the end, as the Lord himself says, that the real yoga is when you are seated in me. You are seated in the Lord. You become one with the Lord. This is what the whole process of coming from the outward approach to life to bringing into the inward approach comes in. And we can see it in our daily life. We can see it how we are so, in a natural process, becomes the shift in our consciousness. We take our consciousness from the physical to the mental and to the higher consciousness. So these are the processes which one goes through when we can easily give in our sense of identity. So all these processes which we are talking about today, that how we start desiring the object, then we talk about the outer renunciation, how outer renunciation is not the ultimate answer. What one needs to do is the inner renunciation. Listening to all these things, one can question that why does this happen? And the real experience for us is where does our sense of identity lies. If my sense of identity lies in my physical, I'm always looking to satisfy my physical. If my identification lies in my vital, I'm only looking to fulfillment of my vital. If my sense of identity lies in my mind or in my mental being, I'm only looking for, or rather I'm mostly lost in my thought process. But if I go a little beyond my sense mind to the higher mind, I give way to the reasoning. I give way to the thought process. I observe, I analyze, I develop that power of discernment. All these things slowly make a shift in our own life. And that is where we become more and more aware of our inner landscape, more of what really lies within, what lies beyond these sensorial enjoyments. Why am I so attached to the materialistic world? What will happen if I'll drop it? Will the idea of intensity of aspiration, how does it make me feel? So that willingness to change, that willingness to withdraw, that becomes the first step. And once that willingness comes in, the process automatically begins. And it is a very slow and steady process and a very constant one. So more and more one needs to give a certain sense of sanction that yes, this is the path which I intend to follow. This is what I wish to explore. So the idea starts with that will. So when the idea and will come together, the execution becomes a natural byproduct. So we don't have to start with controlling, because then that is just a mental control. It will not help us get rid of that desire. It will just suppress that desire. So whenever we'll come in contact with the object of desire, then we'll suddenly realize, oh my God, I had thought that I don't have that desire, but suddenly it is coming. Why? Because I had forgotten about it. I had not purified it. So these are small indicators for us to understand that how these things come under control and how the process really turns inward. And when you start looking at the world from the inner eye, you see the delight in the world, you see the joy in the world. So even if then you experience the object, there is no physical attachment to the object. You experience and you withdraw. You experience and you withdraw. So first the thought of withdrawal, like when you read in the Gita that, oh, withdraw like the tortoise in your shell, that image at just an idea level may be for you like you are going away from the world. But when that image translates into your experience, you realize what a joy it is. That is when you really understand the real meaning of freedom. You recognize that I have a free will. I can go out in the world, experience the world, enjoy the delight of the world, and come back because I have the divine within myself. I have the divine den within myself. I'm no more a slave to my senses, but yet I have the power to enjoy them. It's the real enjoyment only happens in the true freedom of expression. But we often forget or often fail to realize what real freedom means. What as normal understanding of freedom which we have is that I have the ability to follow my senses. I am actually being able to do what I want to do. This is what I want to eat, I can eat. This is where I want to go, I can go. This is the person I want to talk to, I can talk to. But we often fail to recognize that what we actually look like as freedom, it is in the end slavery to our senses. We are bound to our senses. We are bound to follow wherever our senses take. It is like we are using an identity hook and we are experiencing that pull and push in the world. But the actual meaning, or rather the actual experience of freedom lies in when I can choose when to engage and when to let go. When letting go is not a moral constraint, but a conscious choice, that is where the true freedom lies. I may, under the moral constraint, say that, oh, no, I know this is bad, I should not be doing it. There will not be any should, because shoulds come from the idea level. Letting go comes through the experience. So how more and more our journey becomes experiential in its approach. And the experiential approach comes when the experience is not limited to the sensorial understanding, but to the divine revelation. How more and more, when we are rooted within, when we operate in the world, the divinity within us reflects in our action. And it is the divinity within us, when reflected in action, it gives us the ease of our being. So we are able to have that sense of separation, yet be a part of it. So we are away from the pull and push of the world, but still we are connected to the world. And that is what the state of being, which from the outside looks like we are inside, we are withdrawn, but yet we are withdrawn where? We are sitting in the lap of the divine. We are guided by the divine. And we are working in the divine's guidance and following what we are here to do. This is the actual summary, so to speak, of how we start from withdrawing, how we understand the nature of desire, the function of desire, what do we withdraw into, why do we withdraw, and it's all the journey we make from desire to delight in the light of divine, in the guidance of divine. That is what my understanding, my experience of the parts of the being, of the delight of existence is. Now I would like to request Dr. Bijlani to come in and share his thoughts on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. That was really short and sweet, and I don't want to prolong it much by talking too much, which will be quite redundant in light of the clarity and the emphasis with which you have expressed yourself, which came not only just from your mind, but quite obviously from your personal experience. Essentially, the problem is the way we are constituted, half animal and half divine, and not content with it. At least some of us have a very conscious desire to move from where we are, move towards the divine, leave the animal past behind, and move closer to the divine and eventually become one with it. That is where the difficulty comes in. And if you look at it in terms of the ladder through which the evolution has taken place, the vital or the emotional part of the being came before the mental part of the being or the intellect. And the soul, of course, has always been there, hidden in all parts of the creation. But then in the human being, there is a possibility of establishing a conscious contact with the soul, which is a spark of the divine within us, or as Aditi mentioned very beautifully, the den of the divine within. So the intellect or the mental part of the being stands somewhere between the primitive vital and the supreme consciousness of the divine, which is represented in us by the soul. And being intermediate, there's a possibility of this intellect being pulled down by the emotional part of the being or ascending towards the soul. So essentially it comes to a choice to be made. What is it that we consciously decide to move, in which direction we consciously decide to move? And this gets tested the most when it comes to sensory pleasures. And that is what these verses in the Gita are about. That is how we deal with the powerful impact of the objects which stimulate our senses in one way or the other. How we deal with the physical contact with the objects of sense. And that is very important because total withdrawal is impossible. Say the two most obvious pulls are food and sex. One is indispensable for life, and the other may not be indispensable for life, but at least on a large scale it can never be done away with, because the species has to continue. So these are two important contacts which we have with the outer world, which can upset the balance, prevent man from moving from the way he is constituted towards that oneness with the divine. So one way in which people have tried to deal with it, that withdraw, taking the analogy of the tortoise in the Gita very literally. Withdraw means don't consume it. And say, for example, a person had decided that whenever I see a nude scene in a movie, I'll just close my eyes, which is good. Or if, say, food is very tempting, I will stop taking that food, maybe observe a fast, or consciously not take those items in the food which I like very much. Now, that is fine as a first step. But then what happens is that suppose the person has closed his eyes but stops there. The mind, in fact, becomes more turbulent because it still wants to see what it has closed its eyes to. And then, it starts pulling the intellect towards it, so that now the intellect is completely and totally absorbed in thoughts about what the eyes have been closed to. And which means that now the mind has, in fact, turned outwards. And if we keep that analogy of the vital being below, it's also downwards, which means that the vital or the emotional part of the being has been able to, as Aditi said, has been able to hijack the intellect. So that now the intellect is totally absorbed in thoughts about the object which we have actually withdrawn from. So now what is the solution? The solution is to enter first a state of quietude. And how can that quietude be attained? By going one step higher. Which means that now the vital or the emotional part of the being should be hooked to the intellect, which is one step higher. And how can that be done? Say, for example, if I have stopped taking the food that I am attached to, I use the intellect to say that what I am attached to is not only good for my health, and therefore I should not be consuming it. And in this way, the emotional part of the being has been silenced. It has been told to stay quiet, and if necessary, it has been given a slap, a kick, or as the mother said somewhere, that the vital can be sometimes so overpowering that some of the vital desires might have to be rooted out and they may bleed, but then that is a painful process. That is a part of this process in which we are trying to achieve victory over the basic urges which have a way of pulling even the intellect down and hijacking it. But then we may kick it, we may thrash it, but we don't have to kill it. That again is very important in Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's philosophy, because the emotional part of the being is not there just to drag us down and out. It is also a very powerful collaborating in our upward journey, because that is what devotion is all about. So it can be a collaborator on that path, and unless we have that strong, intense aspiration, which is charged with an insurmountable passion and commitment, which all is a part of the emotional part of the being, unless that is there, one will not be able to make much progress, be it on the worldly path or be it on the spiritual path. And therefore it doesn't have to be killed, but at the same time does require a bit of a harsh treatment sometimes to be able to hook to the intellect, to be told that you like this food, but don't take it because it's not good for health. So that is how the emotional part of the being has been silenced. It has been made quiet. So quietude is the first thing. But then this is a fragile quietude, a fragile silence. Why? Because always a possibility that I might be exposed to the same object of desire, and the next time I may not be able to remember that this pull of the vital has been hooked to the intellect and it's not good for me. So the next time the eyes happen to be open or the food happens to be in front of me, I once again get tempted, because the rasa, the taste, the desire has not gone. It has been just sort of kept in one corner, but it is lurking there, just waiting to wake up with the least provocation. So Therefore, this fragile quietude, which has been achieved by hooking the emotional part of the being to the intellect, has to be made more stable by the intellect itself getting hooked to something higher, and that is the soul. And why does that work? That works because the soul is truly stable. It's not volatile. It is not flickering like the intellect. It can swing this way or that way. The soul is something stable. It has no desires. It has an inherent delight and unshakable delight. And that is why when the intellect gets hooked to that, then there is a sort of a unification of the being. The intellect has been stabilized by the soul, and the emotional part of the being has been stabilized by the intellect. So that is how we are able to achieve this. Which means that this process has to be one in which we are trying to move from moving away from that object by not partaking it if necessary. But more important than that, we are working on an inner detachment or an inner renunciation, which means that we truly don't enjoy it. We don't desire it. And our enjoyment becomes independent of this. And then after that, as Aditi said a few minutes back, that you can still engage with the outside world because that is inevitable. But then this engagement will not be an entanglement. That was a beautiful expression that she used. It will not be an entanglement. It will not be a snare. It will not be a slavery. And that is something which we all are looking for. And that is what the Isha Upanishad has also said. Tena tyaktena bhunjitha. Give them up and enjoy them. How can you give up and enjoy both? If that giving up is within. Which means that if that inner renunciation has been achieved, then one can truly enjoy, knowing that yes, I enjoy it, but all the same, my happiness is not dependent on this enjoyment. While it lasts, I can enjoy it, but when it is not there, I'll not miss it. So that is the type of freedom that yoga can give us, understood in the right sense of the word. And that is what the Gita also means, withdrawal. That is withdrawal, in inward withdrawal, so that there's an inward detachment, and even the rasa, or the taste for that desire, is gone. I mean, not only the object is not being used, when the object is not being used, or whether it is being used. In either case, I have a total mastery over the taste for that particular desire, or the rasa for that desire. And there is only one way it can come, as in these verses the Gita says, param drishtva. That is, when we have that supreme vision, when we see things in light of that vision of the Supreme. And that can come when we totally give ourselves up to the divine. Asit matpara. So when we are stationed there, and this Sri Aurobindo says is a hint for what will be the climax in the 18th chapter, that is Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. That is, take refuge in me alone. Or Manmana Bhava, that is, be my-minded. So these are all different ways in which the Gita starts in the 2nd chapter and goes on and finally reaches that climax about this type of a total identification with the divine rather than with our physical, vital and mental. That total identification becomes very clear, its rationale becomes clear, and its significance becomes clear by the 18th chapter. So the Gita is a developing argument, as Sri Aurobindo says, and the hints are there right in the 2nd chapter here in these verses, and the full development will come by the 18th chapter. But at the same time, these shlokas therefore have a great significance in terms of both the ultimate message of the Gita as well as the ultimate truth which can give us a meaningful life full of joy and peace. I think I can end with suggesting that at the end of this session, or any time later that you have time, just try to quieten your mind and reflect over 2 states of happiness that you might have experienced. One is when some desire of yours, desire for a sensory object, has been fulfilled. And for some time after that, you feel that you don't need anything else. Some major desire has been fulfilled and you feel you need nothing else. The second type of happiness, which also sometime or the other you might have experienced, that I don't have everything that I may want, but I don't want anything more, because I think whatever more I get will not bring me ultimate happiness, and therefore I'm quite contented with what I already have. I need nothing else. So these are two different types of states of the mind which are both happy and seem to be quite at peace. One is after the fulfillment of a desire, and the other is reaching a state when I do not have a desire. Just reflect over it and see the difference, and then one realizes the significance of the peace that is achieved by a state of desirelessness. So I'll leave you with that thought, and thank you for listening.